The US has been going heavy on sanctions against Russia ever since Russia invaded Ukraine about 70 days ago. The whole point of the sanctions was to cripple the Russian economy and make it so that they won't want to continue the invasion. Alternatively, it also would harm the capitalist class, often referred to as oligarchy by the US media, enough to the point where the very elite of this capitalist class would lose enough money that they'd be angry at Putin for the situation and attempt to force him out of power. As we can see, no such thing has happened yet. One particular measure of a country's economic health is its currency. This is, of course, measured against the US dollar because it's the world's reserve currency. As we see from the chart, there hasn't been much of a negative effect on the ruble itself. Sure, it has declined, but seemingly not by much. There is the obvious spike in value as it was announced that Russia would only take fuel purchases in its own currency. The problem here for the European Union is that Russia is the largest supplier of liquefied natural gas, or LNG. This means it would be a hell of a struggle in order to find another supplier, and because of this struggle, some European countries are outright defying the US when it comes to these sanctions, purely out of necessity. One such country is Italy. Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi has said that he's confident Russian gas supplies can continue and that companies can pay in rubles. It's a gray area, but there are no official EU rules that prevent payments in the Russian currency, he said. Technically, it's only a violation if you use USD according to more than one source. This has had the opposite effect intended. It has made the demand for the ruble higher.
Well, I'm actually quite confident, but for a silly reason. And that is that there is no official pronouncement of what it means to breach sanctions. It's not, nobody's ever said anything about whether ruble's payments breach sanctions or not, how these payments are organized. So it's such a gray zone here. And as a matter of fact, the evidence we are seeing yesterday, I think it's of this morning, that the largest gas importer in Germany has already paid in rubles. And as a matter of fact, most of the gas importers have already opened their accounts in rubles with Gazprom.
The EU is in a particularly tight spot. They've spent more than a decade transitioning away from nuclear power towards other sources of fuel, that primarily being liquefied natural gas that comes from Russia. And now you see the problem. That trend is now reversing. The most bourgeois of think tanks and councils are demanding the opposite. They're now in favor of returning to nuclear power specifically to counter Russian economic interests. Even the mysterious Council on Foreign Relations agrees with the sentiment. As Europe continues its path of decreasing use of nuclear power, they've increased the amount of gas they use. That gas primarily coming from Russia. Over 3/4 of the EU's imports of natural gas come from Russia at 43%, Norway at 21%, Algeria at 8%, and Qatar at 5%. While more than half of the solid fossil fuel, most of it being coal, their imports originate from Russia at 54%, followed by the United States and Australia. The EU really only has itself to blame. They created this situation by moving away from nuclear power. And as a result, they ended up getting a contradiction of capitalism, which is most pronounced in Germany. Germany has made a massive shift away from nuclear power after the end of the Cold War. Most of the energy companies in the country are privately owned. This means they're out for profitability over sustainability. Coal has a higher rate of profit than nuclear, so they prefer it. Of course, the environmental costs are much higher, but those energy capitalists don't care because the cost of environmental damage is passed on to the state, and therefore onto the taxpayer. Even if the EU was to move away from Russian gas, where would they get it? Already Norway has additional gas production in the work to make up that gap in supply, but it's questionable how much they can cover it. They're looking to make up a good third of all EU usage, which is no small feat. Both liquefaction plants and regasification plants, which are necessary for transporting and using LNG, cost billions of dollars and take multiple years to build. There is a great irony here. The EU could get the LNG from Iran. Iran has a portion of the South Pars North Dome condensate field in the Persian Gulf. And both Iran and Qatar share that gas field. This could help the situation tremendously if the US hadn't put tremendous sanctions, unjust sanctions, on Iran. Russia has even threatened to cut off European countries from energy if they joined NATO or allied too closely with them. But is that possible? Oh, very much so. According to the Energy Post, in recent years, Russia has structured its federal budget in a manner that allows it to stash away $630 billion in foreign exchange reserves. Cash held by the central bank and other currencies for discretionary use, much like individual savings accounts. Russian leaders can use these funds to weather any new sanctions or unexpected changes in the price of oil. For example, last year the Kremlin based its spending on a conservatively low break-even oil price estimate of $45 per barrel, giving itself some latitude. Ultimately, in 2021, the oil prices averaged $71 a barrel, providing a sizable budgetary windfall. As we can see, Russia has calculated this, very, very well. They've gone into great detail to try to cover as much as they can in this situation to cover any damage that would occur as a result, which leads me to believe that they had done actually more planning, at least economically, than we had officially assumed when the invasion of Ukraine began. Now, obviously, this situation is going to get worse, and Russia cannot weather sanctions indefinitely. Eventually, they'll have to be lifted one way or another. But Russia can depend on China to some degree, but it cannot live solely off of China. That would be something the Russian economy and something that Putin himself would not be able to stand. Russia does not like being dependent on another country. So this is something they'll try to avoid. So that's why you see a general shift in the actual sanctions. Like normally they sanctioned the Russian economy. Then they sanctioned Putin himself, and he didn't care. Then they started sanctioning individual large capitalists inside of Russia. Now, of course, the goal of that was to anger them enough that they would rebel against Putin and try to force him out of power. Now, thus far, that has not been successful. But I am expecting that there are some rumblings, there's got to be some anger among those elite of the capitalist class who've lost billions of dollars as a result of this. They can't be happy about it. And whether or not they can do something about Putin is another matter. We're looking at a global competition in capital. I mean, there's much more to be put here. Along with taking many territories of Ukraine, there is the building of the LNG pipeline that Russia would have that would compete with an American one that is planned. So, once again, we see another war taking place because of energy resources. Now, a bit different than, say, the Iraq war over the Iraqi oil. This one is more of an inter-imperialist conflict between two sides trying to make money off of the oil. And Russia is not a largely defenseless country as Iraq and Afghanistan were, although it's questionable whether Afghanistan was really defenseless considering that they won. So what we see is a situation definitely between two national capitals, which is imperialism. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this situation plays out, because I think both sides have a definite playbook that we haven't seen yet. I mean, Putin's very good at calculating these things, and I'm sure the United States has some kind of plan for dealing with an inter-imperialist conflict that we haven't seen yet. I'm sitting there somewhere in a dossier waiting to be used in a situation like this, and that still all remains to be seen. And that is what we should keep an eye out for. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.